Hey there, gang. So I know it's been about a month since my last video, but given that the patch has now been out for a couple weeks now, I figured it's time we have ourselves a clown conversation, a clownversation, if you will, about the state of clown in Dead by Daylight given the increased palette density. Now, I've seen some comments floating here and there from different creators and different people talking about how they feel like clown is able to get away a bit better with these changes compared to some other killers. And while that might potentially be true, we'll be kind of talking about that in a bit, in addition to other thoughts on clown. I do want to heavily emphasize going into this video that this is bad. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I'm gonna be full stop. These changes made the game harder for clown. My matches are not easier, they are noticeably harder, and even if some of the pallets that have been added were weaker, it's the grand scheme of things that we're going to look at and talk about that play into how the difficulty increases for clown, because even if the pallets themselves are playable, right, it's the increased difficulty of the chases on tandem with the macro that clown himself already lacks in, right, that we're going to be looking into, that really just takes clown from his current position, which was already fairly low, to even lower. It puts more impetus on having to run more strict meta loadouts, right? Things like that. So I'm going to go ahead now and transition myself over to a little PowerPoint. I've been doing a lot of these recently, y'all, and I'm not going to lie, I feel like it does kind of help me with structure my thoughts and articulate them. So we're going to go ahead and do that now in just a second here. Alright, gang, so now let's talk pallets. To first give people a little bit of an introduction about me, since I didn't do that earlier, and for those who haven't seen my content in the past, I am a dedicated clown-only player for the most part, right? I've done a little bit of dabbling here and there, especially for requests for my viewers on some of my streams, but by and large, I only spend my blood points on clown, and I only play clown when I play Dead by Daylight, and I've been doing that for the last 3 to 4 years. At one point, it was after Deathslinger got nerfed that I started looking at other killers. The nerf I'm particularly talking about was the change to his aim down sight speed. I used to play Deathslinger trying to go for quick scopes, and after they changed that and they gave it a much longer wind-up timer, I just started playing other killers, and one of those was Clown. At one point, I started throwing yellow bottles, and I started really doing that, and I saw a lot of potential in that, so I started trying to see if there was some synergy in, between the yellows and the pinks. And it was something that I pioneered and innovated on my own. This was during an era, mind you, especially where a lot of people thought the yellow bottles were useless. They saw Clown as a flask and either 15% character who had to kick a whole bunch of pallets, right? You had to kick pretty much every pallet. You would just spam your pinks and hit survivors in dead zones, because this was back when we actually had pallet dead zones, but I digress. And going forward from there, I made a very large 200-page plus clown guide on how to play a whole bunch of different tiles. I talk about different strategies regarding the bottles themselves and how to use them. Also, my thoughts on different perks. I give build suggestions, right? Basically, a clown encyclopedia to help people get all of the resources and information that they need so they can play clown to the best of their ability and absorb everything that it comes from my experience, right? When it comes to how I play clown and chase, how I'm able to do well, etc., over the course of these 3 to 4 years, which has become more difficult, as the game has become more survivor-sided and has given a lot of casual protection tools for people that are more newer and less experienced with the game, right? But kind of going up to this point, right, I have been playing clown, very dedicated, very experienced, at least I would say, not to really kind of go more into hubris, but, back to the point here, looking specifically at numbers is what I'm trying to say, is that I've played over 7,000 matches of clown these last 3 to 4 years. And during that time, I have barely kicked over 14,000 pallets. Now, this screenshot is probably about a month or two dated, so this number might be a slight bit higher, right? But I initially did take this screenshot of my stats shortly after Behavior's official stats became available. And the point here of especially putting it, right on the entry slide is to kind of showcase, right? When it comes to how much I play clown, when it comes to what I know about clown and everything, leading up to just kind of my background as a clown player, I have played clown across almost every single map for 7,000 plus matches. This includes Gideon Meat Plant, right? RPD. So many maps out there where you probably do want to kick more than 2 pallets. And yet, for 7,000 plus matches for multiple years, even factoring in these maps in my rotation, I have barely kicked over 2 pallets per match for 7,000 matches. So the whole point of what I'm trying to say here, right, is that when it comes to my expertise, my understanding of playing clown and how to play around pallets specifically, right? We're talking about actually playing in chase as clown with pallets, pre-dropped and otherwise, especially pre-dropped, because if I'm only kicking 2 pallets per match, that means there's a hell of a lot of pallets that are just sitting already thrown by the time my matches are over, right? And that's kind of what we're going to be diving into here from my perspective. So first things first, let's talk about the main question that's probably on everyone's mind. Sorry, y'all, if I am in the way of some of the information on these slides. I can probably try to see if I can move myself a bit, but at the end of the day, I'm probably going to be blocking something, right? I'm going to be narrating most of what y'all are seeing on screen, so anything that's blocked should kind of probably is going to be read aloud. But anyways, going forward, many people might be inclined to believe that Clown is better equipped to deal with the increased pallet spawns across the majority of the maps now when compared to other killers. And this, may be true, right? You look at killers like Bubba, you look at killers like maybe Onryo, right? Where even though they have the mobility, if there are just so many pallets, the whole play style of having to kick a pallet and teleport and kick another pallet, right? You're not actually creating dead zones. You're not actually converting any macro pressure, right? Especially if their power has been nerfed or put in a position where it just doesn't scale or ramp with the objective gen speed progress that survivors currently have, right? We're not even gotten into gen repair times or even hook times or anything like that, right? But just even looking at that metric, I can kind of see why some people might think that, sure, just because when you look at how Clown is able to play pre-drop pallets, adding more pallets might seem rather inconsequential. How exactly is that going to help survivors? But at the same time, just because you have a killer who beforehand was able to handle the pallets, right? The fact is, Clown's power is not that strong in chase. It's good in chase at dealing with some pallets, right? But when you start throwing pallets everywhere, even if the pallets themselves are inherently weaker, which we're going to be talking about too, right? It doesn't, at some point, or it gets to a point where it doesn't matter individually how strong that pallet is. The sheer density, and not even just the density, but the proximity that the pallets have to one another, that is what creates the main problem for Clown and Chase, which is where you now need to ask yourself, if Clown is a micro-heavy killer with very little emphasis in his power and his kit on mobility and macro pressure, how does Clown fare in the grand scheme of things if his micro capability, right, his micro potential becomes weaker? He becomes much worse, right? Much worse by comparison, because Clown is very much the example of a killer who puts all of his eggs in one basket. You make that basket smaller, you can't hold as many eggs. They start falling out, right? Or you only walk away with fewer eggs by comparison. Replace these eggs with hook states and kills, and now you start to see a problem when it comes to playing Clown in the current state of Dead by Daylight, right? And again, right, especially looking at other killers, I could see why some people also have these same types of qualms when it comes to playing their killers as well. But that being said, even though Clown initially before the density was probably better at pallets, that's not how you look at things post increased density. Increasing pallets is not so much in a vacuum a one-to-one. The best way I could really phrase it when you start adding extra pallets like this is that if each pallet had a prior number value, right? Let's say pallets are worth, a weak pallet is worth 1 and a strong pallet's worth 2. Well, when you start adding a bunch of weak pallets, those pallets may only have 1 in value, but the sheer number of them, especially near other weak pallets, especially if that weak pallet's near a strong pallet and that strong pallet connects to the main building, which probably gets you to shack and is also outside your 3-gen, right? Well, those weak pallets go from 1 to 1.5 or possibly 2. right? And that pallet I just talked about being 2, that's up to 3 or 4. We're talking about the strength and the value again that it provides a survivor and chase. Now do you start to see the problem that Clown has when it comes to post increased density and just playing around the pallets? He can't really play around the pallets. He has to start kicking some of these pallets. But again, right, we're talking about kicking pallets that otherwise themselves were not that strong beforehand because of just the state of the game. Otherwise, I guess you could say in a, I don't want to say bigger picture, I'm trying to like find a better way of describing it, but basically in essence, when you look at how maps were designed beforehand, the ability to create dead zones was a part of decision making as killer for creating advantages in chase, right? You want to be able to push or force survivors to go to disadvantageous locations, which you otherwise can't do now. There aren't really disadvantageous locations because of the extra pallets. And thus the result, right? Talking about how these pallets, where what this means when I say they increase in number, it's the value they get basically translates to say that his chases become longer in essence after the fact, right? You are not having faster chases as Clown, you're having longer chases. And to rephrase this in short, Clown did not get stronger with the addition of extra pallets. He became weaker. And the specific reason for this is because at the end of the day, regardless of whether he's in chase or outside of chase, Clown cannot afford to spend any of his time simply kicking pallets. He's already stressed for the time that he has as it is because he's a micro heavy killer. He has very little in macro, and having him stall his chases in micro means that he's doing even less in the macro, and given his lack of mobility when he's outside of chase, the last thing he wants to do is simply kicking pallets. He has 3 other survivors to worry about, right? At the end of the day, even though kicking a pallet takes as simple as 2.3 seconds, when you look at both the influence it has on the micro and macro, it just snowballs out of control in the survivor's favor. This is because when you look at simply in chase, right? Kicking a pallet with how many pallets there are now, you're not going to be making dead zones. They're going to be making it to another pallet, and if you kick that pallet, they're going to make it to another pallet. If the pallet is strong enough, they're not going to be throwing it immediately. They're going to probably force you to have to play around that pallet to a point where by the time you do end up potentially getting a hit, well, they're not going to give you that opportunity because they're going to throw the pallet and you're probably going to be out of bottles, right? At the end of the day, your chase is going to get extended on average anywhere from 15 to 20 plus seconds per pallet for every pallet that you kick in chase. Now think about, what does 15 to 20 seconds translate into when it comes to generator repair progress? That's a lot of repair progress per pallet, right? We're only looking at just the extension of the chase also when it comes to generator repair progress. We're not even factoring in if you decide to break the chase, if you decide to push another survivor off of the generator, how much time you need to do that, how much that time factors into generator repair progress, the fact that you'd only be doing that potentially to one survivor, and thus doing that, you know, you haven't capitalized on any pressure from the first survivor. You still got survivors 3 and 4 who are still the entire time, even as you go for a different survivor, working on generators 2. You're going to be losing objectives for this, having to do this, right? This is what I mean when I say the game snowballs out of control, especially even in just the micro. Clown may be a good chase beforehand. People, again, saw him as a good micro chase killer, you know, even myself especially. I've regarded him as one of the best, probably M1 chase killers in the game. But at the same time, this makes him weaker in chase, right? Which is where this becomes so problematic, because when you have a killer who is all heavy micro and no macro, and they struggle in chase, they lose in the 1v4, right? That's kind of why a lot of people, even up to now, as Clown becomes more mainstream, as using the yellow and the pinks becomes more evident, and, you know, as survivors start to talk and get their own experience, I've seen more and more people say that the way you beat Clown is you play safe, you sit on generators, and he's not going to be able to keep up with the pressure. You play risky and you give him hits that he otherwise wouldn't have been able to achieve, even if he worked his hardest and you just, again, simply played safe. Then yeah, he might have a chance of winning. He might have a chance of coming back with an outcome that he would not have objectively been able to achieve. Because at the end of the day, again, right, going back to what I talk about when it comes to that influence in macro, this is a game all about numbers. when the time it takes to catch up to a survivor, the time it takes to break a chase and go for a different survivor, the time that it takes to repair a generator, that's all numbers, gang. And that is where the real problem comes into, just this simple idea of I'm just going to kick a pallet, right? When you're a killer like Clown who can't simply struggle in the one area he's supposed to be good at. You know, because again, as I previously mentioned, the second part of this, let's say you even have a good chase, right? Let's say that you have a chase where you're able to play around a survivor, down them without kicking too many pallets, and you even have them hooked in an advantageous location. So you're thinking to yourself, since I have a bit of objective pressure with the hook, maybe I can kick some pallets to create a dead zone and then play off of the unhook, right? Well, the issue here is there's now too many pallets for that. There's too many pallets. Hook states last 70 seconds. You're going to be potentially dealing with anti-tunnel perks. And probably the biggest one is that, again, right? Since you are a killer with no mobility, if you are spending this time kicking these pallets, you're going to have to take that time. You're going to then have to take the time of physically walking at base M1 killer speed to a different survivor. I mean, admittedly, it will be probably a little bit faster with the utilization of a yellow here or there, but, you know, that is setting you behind on bottle economy going into that chase, but I digress. The main point that I'm trying to say here is that it's not a simple matter of play your chases without kicking too many pallets and then kick the pallets post-chase. Because when you kick your pallets post-chase, you're going to be letting survivors cook their teammate on the hook for about as many of that 70 seconds as they can, because that extra 10 seconds goes miles as well when it comes to generator repair progress. And then when you finally do start your chase, well, your chase is going to be having to eat through a pre-run. It's going to have to go through 2 or 3 layers of pallets that you hadn't got to yet, right? Because you're likely going to be kicking the pallets that were at a different location of the map away from where you're starting your next chase. Do you get what I'm saying? So that is really where just this idea of, oh, well, if I'm not going to kick a pallet in chase, I'll kick it outside of chase. That's not helping you. That's hurting you. Especially again when you look at survivor coordination. Now, if you're going against survivors who aren't playing as coordinated, and on coordination as survivor against Clown, I do want to talk about this too, because it's really not a calm situation in my opinion. I do feel like if you are a solo queue survivor and you simply use the HUD, right, you can do a whole lot against Clown even at just the base level. When you see Clown is in chase and you don't hear a terror radius, unless you know for a fact he's got some type of perk to hide his terror radius, then you know he's not near you. You know you're able to sit on a generator freely. If you similarly are also in a relatively near area to the hook and you don't hear the terror radius, you know he's not near the hook and you get a safe unhook, right? There are so many different ways where even without comms, survivors can coordinate well against Clown. It's playing into how little his mobility is, gang. That's really what it's all about. And that's, you know, why even again, right? You can't simply just choose where to kick pallets differently. Now, we've, I think, come full circle on that. I do kind of want to carry this a bit forward too. Let's kind of talk about, in a similar way, like I want to go a little bit further with this though. We're going to be looking at comparing Clown in the past to where he is now. And previously, where Clown, he was able to manage pallets, right? And this is where I think people are getting their wrong idea. Previously, Clown was able to isolate pallets due to the lack of density. So you would have a weak pallet at an area of the map where a survivor can't just say, I'm going to play this pallet and push Clown in a position where he uses his bottles to where I can leave this pallet, chain it to a different tile, and then now Clown has to play around that pallet, right? And if he doesn't play around both of these pallets together, if he chooses to kick a pallet, I can take this chase even further, right? Where we're at now is that Clown isn't able to isolate or play pallets independently when the pallets themselves aren't isolated or independent. You've got a segue and a circuit of pallets where survivors either can play them intelligently and greed them for a bit, they simply pre-drop them, and then they take advantage of the distance they do that, right, in the chase, where if you try to play around the pre-drop pallet, where after you start using resources again, they run to another pallet and they drop that, and you create the circuit. So you're now having to play as Clown. If you can't isolate and play pallets independently, you're basically managing 2 or 3 pallets simultaneously. And think about how many Clown players don't have the experience to use Clown's yellow and pink bottles around 2 or 3 pallets at the same time. You know, I wrote my guide to help people play the isolated and independent pallets. You know what I mean? Because there are a lot of people getting into Clown. One of the major difficulties people have is simply playing a single pre-drop pallet with the yellows and the pinks. So if people are struggling just to play a single pallet with a yellow and the pink, how are people supposed to get by if they now have to consistently play 2 or 3 pre-drop pallets at the same time? Even I struggle with this, gang, because even if, right, as I say in here, which I kind of block off, with enough Clown experience, grit, wit, and focus, you can still manage playing around 2 or 3 pre-drop pallets depending on what the tiles are. You're going to probably get flustered at some point. You're probably going to make a mistake due to just human error, y'all. Everybody makes mistakes, myself included. And because of that, you're going to get punished very severely. Because, again, we're looking at 15 to 20 seconds added per just not only kicking pallets, but one thing I didn't even talk about too, right? When you look at the commission of resources on Clown, using your bottles, if you use your bottles and you don't get a hit and you now have to reload, well, that reload gives them a tile chain to a different pallet, especially given how many pallets there are, right? That's another 15 to 20 second chase extension. So you really have to make sure that you're using your bottles well as you are playing 2 to 3 pallets simultaneously, which you have to consistently do. It's not like beforehand where the margin of error was less strict, right? Which is one thing I'm about to talk to as we kind of come full circle later on with everything. Where we're at right now is the margin of error is so strict because Clown as a resource killer and gets punished when he has to reload, right? And having to play 2 to 3 different pallets, the moment you make a misplacement of your bottle, either a yellow to where they get the haste, the misplacement of the pink so they don't get slowed, so they make it back to the vault, and now you're down on the bottles that you used, right? This really, really hurts Clown players a lot because he can't just break the chase. As I mentioned earlier, once you start breaking the chase, you are not walking away with anything in the way of macro pressure. That injury probably could get healed, assuming you even got an injury. The pallets that you kicked leading up to that, even if you kick a pallet before you break the chase, right, that's not going to matter. And you're walking away in a much, much worse state than we were before they had as many pallets. So next, this is kind of a term that for what we've been talking about this whole video, right? Just how there are so many pallets, how survivors are able to just use weaker pallets to connect to stronger pallets, and by virtue of that, the weaker pallets themselves are now stronger, right? Previously, weaker pallets were a detriment to survivors mid-chase. When dead zones are removed and tiles become more interconnected, weaker pallets become stronger since they now provide an avenue for survivors to reach a different, stronger pallet window or structure. Even worse, since the pallet density increases universal, this trait also exists for independently strong survivors as well. This is a definition that I read off for what I like to call the Lery's effect. When pallets, windows, and structures become connected in such a way where a survivor can use them as obstacles for moving in a singular direction, you have gameplay that is very similar to a match on Lery's Memorial. For those that don't know or haven't really looked at it in this type of way, right? One of the things I really kind of dislike about playing Lery's on Clown is that Lery's is very easy for you to just run in a straight line. Windows are connected to windows, which are connected to pallets, which are connected to windows, which are connected to windows, which are connected. You get what I'm saying? It's a map where it's almost like a racetrack. And that is where Clown struggles. Clown struggles when survivors are seldom staying at one particular place. This is what I talked about when it came to being able to isolate and play pallets independently, right? Lery's was all about the windows. You've got some strong pallets, but it's all about the windows. And when you have windows, especially like this, right, pallets functioning similarly for other maps, this means survivors don't have to stay at one particular place. They're running all over. And we're talking running all over after pre-running, right? So you're already being given the runaround before you actually get close enough to start the chase. And by the time you're even in the chase, where you can start probably even utilizing your bottles to any type of effect where it really matters, right? You're still having to deal with the fact that you're not able to lock a survivor in one area. They're going to be vaulting a window, into a pallet, into a window, at least like they would on Lery's, right? Except probably on any other map, it's going to be a pallet, into a window, into a main building, into a pallet. You get what I mean? That's basically the issue that we're seeing, and I think not only why Clown struggles, but why a lot of other killers struggle is because of this I guess you could call it this phenomenon, the Lery's effect, right? So this is kind of like a visual example of that. This is a partial rendition of Lery's Memorial. So you've got here, right, one of these little like rooms here. You know, a lot of the little small little rooms on Lery's, they either have like two windows and a doorway. Maybe they have two doorways and two windows. Sometimes you'll have like a pallet, which is like a 50-50, but that pallet connects to a window and then that window will connect to another window, right? Maybe you get them out of that window in a room and they start running to a pallet. And then from there, if they don't even need to drop the pallet, they keep going and then they vault the window. And then that window connects to another window. You get what I'm saying, right? This is what it looks like on Lery's, but also, just realized I'm partially blocking the key. My apologies, gang. Let me go ahead and temporarily move myself up here. But when you look at, again, other windows, right, or other maps, imagine they were on, let's say, something like even, let's say a Macmillan map, right? This could be a filler jungle gym. This jungle gym connects to a filler pallet, and then this connects as well to another pallet loop, which connects to a jungle gym, which connects in the main building, right? Or this could be Killer Shack, which would have another probably filler pallet here. Then that filler pallet is also going to connect to another pallet, or you get what I'm saying, where it kind of really just comes full circle. You have this circuit on other maps where survivors can just not stay in one place when they're against Clown. They're able to just vault these pallets because you're not kicking them. And if you are kicking the pallets, well, they'll just run to a different pallet and a different tile that they haven't gone to yet. That's basically what I mean when I say the Lery's effect. And that's kind of why it's as if Clown and other killers are consistently struggling on other maps that, especially before, they didn't even have problems with. You know, I was watching a streamer, I don't necessarily name drop, right? But they are a comp high-level DVD player, and they are someone who said they previously liked playing on Wrecker's Yard before the extra pallets because Wrecker's Yard felt rather balanced. It had a central killer shack. It didn't have any type of jank main building. The fact that the killer shack was central and there was a consistent basement spawn meant that there was no RNG factor there, right? And there weren't as many pallets to make the chases feel ridiculous or unfair, right? You could create dead zones. The pallets weren't as strong consistently across the board, right? Well, post change, there's more pallets. There's more pallets. The tiles themselves are stronger, and Wreckers is not at all like it used to be because it's a smaller map and survivors are able to rotate better to the increased pallets. You're dealing with a situation where generators get repaired a lot easier and your chases are not any faster, right? So that's kind of the problem. Now, even on maps that were otherwise good for killers because they were horizontally smaller, well, a map that's horizontally smaller isn't really all that much better when you've got more pallets. So where does this leave Clown, right? Where are we at the end of the day when it comes to post-patch? If you're a Clown player, where does this put you going forward? Well, the requirement and incentive for kicking pallets, even as a Clown player with a lot of experience, we're talking about someone like myself, right? The requirement and incentive for kicking pallets becomes much higher. Where I previously was able to get away for 7,000 plus matches only kicking 2 pallets on average, even on some of the worst of maps, I'm gonna be honest, y'all, if I really want to have a pretty good kill rate, unless I'm going full on meta build and playing super sweaty and tunneling and all types of shit like that, I'm very much kicking more than 2 pallets now. I would, if I really had to be honest, the most reasonable number of pallets that I could see myself kicking on average per map following this would be 4. 4. That is a doubling of the amount of pallets that I'm kicking per match. And, you know, perhaps I would want to kick more, right? That could be a conservative estimate. You know, but that's at the end of the day, we're talking about someone like me who, when you look at the worst of the maps factored into the equation, I went 7,000 matches only kicking 2 pallets. You know, 2 pallets, gang. So going from 2 to 4, doubling that average, even though I've played Clown for 3 to 4 years, I feel like that's almost like a canary in the coal mine when it comes to underscoring the issue, especially when you take into account that a lot of the survivors that I'm playing against, think about how much experience they have in the Clown versus Survivor matchup, right? There's a very good chance that not only am I going against survivors who have half of my hours in Dead by Daylight overall, but they probably have a fourth, if not a 10th of the matches and the hours playing against Clown and Chase. So I'm playing against survivors with a fraction of my experience. I am struggling due to this increased margin of error because when it comes to making mistakes in Chase, survivors are able to get away with more due to the increased pallet density. And, you know, again, looking at pre-running, right? Pre-running becomes more effective since it just becomes a buffer and a layer of extra chase and repair progress in the macro, right? Yada, yada, added on top of that. And that really, really is kind of a scary thing to think about when you think about everyone else who plays this game, you know? As much as I kind of, in a way, set a standard for what Clown can do, not, you know, just trying to be objective here, right? Since a lot of people do look up to me when it comes to my gameplay, as much as I do set that standard, it's important to remember that not everyone plays at this level. A lot of people are not as capable. And this means that everyone else is going to struggle because chase times are longer on average. My chase times are longer on average. I'm having to kick more pallets on average. However, meanwhile, generators still take 90 seconds to repair. Hook states are still now 70 seconds. So everything becomes harder for me, right? Everything on my end when it comes to my ability to progress my objective becomes worse. Survivors is still the same. And then you start factoring in the perks to make it even worse, right? That's where we come back to that impetus where Clown is almost feeling like because of these base kit nerfs, he's in an arms race having to give up perk slots, right? You're going to have to run probably more sweaty and meta, even someone like me, just to keep up with just the proportionality, right? You know, I previously made my Gift of Clown build to balance the proportionality of 1v4 Survivor Generator Repair Progress versus Clown Chase and Hook times. Well, not even just with that build. If you just look at needing to stall out how quickly survivors are able to do things on their end, because just when it comes to you having faster chases, right? The pallets are making your chases even longer. You are now in an arms race to keep up with these base kit changes to run meta perks. Your kill potential is not in a good spot on Clown right now for all of the reasons that I've talked about and mentioned above, which is goes back to that whole point about needing to run meta perks. Clown has gotten worse with this patch, even though his bottles have received very good changes at the same time. You know, we spent a lot of time talking about how Clown in this video, how he like is worse off with because of the extra pallets, but and I know I haven't spent a lot of time talking about how Clown plays in Chase, just the general feel of it, right? So let's kind of, I guess, wrap up the video talking about that, talking about what I think about Clown in Chase. I do think that with the increase of Clown's pink bottles from 1 second to 1.2 hindered, I think that alongside the activation timer going from 1 second to 1.6 seconds as well, honestly, all this has made Clown a lot better when it comes to feel in Chase. I also believe that when it comes to the execution of certain combos and being able to throw yellow bottles more aggressively for double bottle placement, this has also become better and easier since survivors are not able to not only get the yellow, but you could also convince them to attempt to get the yellow when they otherwise couldn't, right? A lot of survivors, going back to that lacking in that experience, they don't know how long it takes for a yellow bottle to activate. They don't necessarily know the extent of the yellow bottle gas cloud. And so when you get that experience difference, when you do these really aggressive yellow bottle placement setups, right, you can bait a survivor to aggressively overextending, trying to have their cake and eat it too by getting the yellow as well as avoiding getting a hit. You can get the hit, maintain your yellow, and then you're having a faster chase, right? That was something you previously would not have been able to do when the yellow bottles had a 1 second activation timer, because you just reasonably would not be able to get the yellow without them getting the yellow and then possibly making that pallet, right? Because even if the worst case scenario looking at post change when it comes to the current timers, 1.6 activation on yellow, even if a survivor is able to overextend in a way where they get the yellow, right? Following the new timers, if you place it well enough, they're going to get it and they're going to take a hit, you know? They're not going to get it and get away, which was the main problem that you would have beforehand, before the activation timer was increased. Because if you try to aggressively pre-place, like I said, right, you're just getting it that much sooner. You're not rotating fast enough while it's inactive, right? So I do really, really like the activation timer increase on the yellows. Again, especially talking more about the hindered. Previously, I thought that either 15% was one of Clown's best add-ons because that extra half a second goes miles when you look at Clown's yellow bottles being 12% now, where Clown needs to, in order for Clown to excel in chase using his yellows and pinks, he needs to have the numbers lined up in a way where survivors are intoxicated while Clown is sped up. And so the issue that Clown had without either 15%, without this 0.6% increase on the duration of his pink bottles, is that you would have a frequency of either a survivor's not slowed down while Clown is sped up, or Clown isn't sped up while a survivor is slowed down, because you would have to try to get these pink bottle placements in a way, right, where they were so specific, given how short the timer was, that you probably weren't doing it in a window where your yellow was active. And that is why I do think it was really, really great that they increased his pink bottles by a sixth of a second. Because again, looking at just even the percentages of that, right? So a sixth of a second may not seem like a lot, but that is a 60% increase to the base kit duration of his pinks compared to they were before. 60%. And you can run either 15% to now take this up to 2.1 seconds, which is great. 2.1 seconds, does that sound familiar, gang? That is a tenth of a second longer compared to how his pinks were at base, right? A couple patches ago. So 2.1 seconds on his pinks with a 12%, or excuse me, it's now up to 14%. Y'all, with all the changes the Clown is getting these last few patches of PTB, sometimes I get them all mixed up. With a 14% hinder, though, for 1.6 seconds, right? Up to 2.1 seconds with either 15%. That's a pretty strong pink, gang. That's a pretty damn good pink. And that's in tandem with those 12% yellows. The numbers really, really matter. And I think the numbers are in a great place for Clown. You know, Clown feels a lot better to play because of that. Both when it comes to the execution of the bottles themselves, right, and how you throw the bottles because of the activation timer increases and the increases on the hindrances, but also just how everything comes together for the bigger picture, right? What's the bigger picture about when it comes to using a yellow and a pink bottle around a pre-drop pallet? Getting the hit. So you can get your chases faster, right? You're not kicking pallets, you're getting faster chases from playing the pallets pre-dropped. And that is improved. So I do really, really like that. It's just when you look at how many pallets there are now and how the pallets dynamically does change how you play Clown and Chase, because you aren't able to isolate and play tiles independently and you have to play 2 to 3 tiles pallets simultaneously, right? He's still sadly weaker. Would he be better compared to the prior numbers? Honestly, y'all, I really don't know. Maybe the faster activation on the yellow in some circumstances could help you with that transition from the haste, but the pink is going to definitely make it, right? We're talking about that 1 second duration compared to the 1 seconds as it is now. A 1 second duration hindrance, looking at the prior numbers, would make it very, very, very difficult, especially without either for playing any of those pallets pre-dropped. So if you aren't able to play them pre-dropped, and if you aren't really able to reasonably stop them from chaining in a lot of situations, right? I do think Clown would have probably been worse off. Looking at just the state of the pallets, right, and the prior numbers. But, you know, so that's kind of why I do think this is good. It is good that Clown's yellow bottles take 1.6 seconds to activate, and his Intoxication lasts 1.6 seconds at base. So, really, really do like that. I think of just about now, gang. I've said about everything that is to come to talk about here. Probably not going to have any gameplay for this video. I just kind of wanted to spend some time talking with you guys. I'm going to be looking to have some gameplay footage in the future, but, you know, I'm gonna be honest, gang. A lot of the matches that I have played thus far with the new patch, I haven't really enjoyed. That is also part of the reason why I didn't want to include any matches even in this video, is because, you know, I want to keep things more constructive. I want to keep things more objective and level-headed, and a lot of the footage that I had for y'all, gang, wasn't very level-headed. I've not enjoyed a lot of my matches playing DBD following a lot of these changes, but, you know, just trying to be straightforward with you guys. So, hope y'all really enjoyed this video and everything I had to say here. You know, apologies again for any repetition. I'm speaking a lot of this off of the cuff, following just the production of this, of this PowerPoint. I also haven't made a video in about a month, gang. So, you know, I'm kind of just working with, kind of what I've got here, gang. So kind of just bear with me. But, you know, I hope y'all really like this video. And if you're interested in learning how to play Clown better, for the most part, I would say that a good level or a good amount of my guide is still accurate. I have a very detailed clown guide, as I previously mentioned, so I will have a link to my clown guide in the description. I also do stream live on Twitch during the weekdays, albeit, playing the game has been frustrating, as I've said, so I will have a link to my stream in the description as well, in the event that, you do want to come by, you do want to say hey, and you do want to kind of share and the burden of the experiences that I've had to undertake as well. Maybe kind of relate to me if you've also had bothersome matches yourself in Dead by Daylight. And yeah, if you also really like this video, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe, not just for yourself so you know when I post new videos, but also because it really helps me out a lot with YouTube algorithm. It pushes my videos to more people, which means I'm able to help a lot more people when it comes to learning about the game and everything when it comes to that. So other than that, hope y'all really enjoyed this video, and I'll see y'all next time. Later, gang.